Sure.
Great. So we're delighted to have Gopal Jain with us, MD and founder of Gaja Capital. Welcome, Gopal.
Thank you, Tariq. It's been great talking to you in the run-up to this panel discussion. And thank you so much for inviting me over. I have great memories of Thai. I think I go back almost 20 years, right, to the beginning. And there have been times I've been guilty of not being uh, active, and I'd love to correct that over the coming years.
Well, that's nice to hear. We are honored to have you. And thank you, Satish Jha in Boston, for making the introduction to Gopal. So as we get started, just a word on why the session today will be very interesting. You've all heard the expression, follow the money. And if it happens to be smart money, well, even better. So within the private equity world, Gaja Capital has acquired a leading position in edtech investments. So for sure, you will get to hear about why the money is going into in education and what's going on in that sector. So Gopal, here's what we'll do today. We'll cover background and personal experiences focusing on investments and private equity. Then we move on to the education sector from both an India and a global perspective, and then touch upon Gaja investments and approach, and to the extent possible, share some tips to founders and aspiring entrepreneurs. Then we open up for questions from attendees.
Sounds like a plan, Tariq.
Does that work?
Sounds like a plan.
Great. You did send me a couple of very content-rich slides, and I'll bring them up at the time when we get into that part of the conversation. So, Aparna, just one thing. I guess you're going to be keeping an eye on the questions as well. So if I'm kind of distracted and not seeing the chat window, please just flag it to me, and I'll read them out.
Sure.
So just by way of background, Gopal, you got an early start in trading stocks and investing while at school, well ahead of your internet days. What was that like?
Well, I grew up in a household full of books, thanks to my dad, and I grew up in a household where stocks were discussed, thanks to my mom. So even though, it was very clear, it was made clear to me that, listen, in a way, getting into IIT was set as a test for me. But well before getting into IIT, I developed a hobby in stocks. I made my first investment when I was 13. And like I said, the credit goes to my parents.
Did you have your own laptop at that time?
Well, I'd seen a computer in school, and they weren't laptops, at least not in I didn't see a laptop until I got into IIT, if memory serves me right. But yes, computers. We had computers in school, and it was tough getting into the computer science stream. I was lucky to get into the computer science stream, and IIT, of course, then afforded me a technology to kind of combine a little bit of computers and finance and investing.
I see. So maybe you were using Lotus, but it was a broker account and phone calls all the time, right?
Well, markets were very different. I started with research. I figured that there was no research in India, and markets were unregulated. So it was really an investor's delight. There was so much you could do with so little. As we say, in the kingdom of the blind, the one-eyed is king.
Right. Great. So then just moving on, while doing electrical engineering, you did some entrepreneurial activity at college. What was that? And did you launch a startup?
I did. At the end of my third year, I set up an equity research firm and managed to get together some angel funding. In the days that I was on the IIT campus, IITs were considered a gateway to get to the US. And for whatever reason, I didn't want to go to the US. And I wanted to be an entrepreneur. So not going to the US and being an entrepreneur were foreign thoughts on the campus. Nobody else Nobody else was thinking this way. And yes, I did manage to set up a startup. I managed to attract some angels, four angels, because my first startup was a long period of time, didn't do well.
Well, that's very interesting. Like definitely going against the trends and the mold of the day, so
Yes, this was way back, 30 years back, Tariq. You
yeah,
remind me,
very
I'm an old
nice.
man now.
So I guess when you left college, did you go straight into finance or you did something else first?
Well, I self-taught myself finance on the campus. Those were that I give the credit to IIT. It was a liberal environment, no attendance requirements. So I pretty much taught myself finance, security analysis, portfolio management, and, uh, and from an education perspective, there's no substitute for knowledge, and you can either be formally educated or informally educated. In finance, I decided to be informally educated, and I just one thing led to the other. So I started working in '91 on my startup, and I've been now working for the last 29 years. I graduated a year later in '92.
Very interesting. We may come back to this formal knowledge and informal knowledge. There's so much in there that applies to everybody, I think. So let's move on to the private equity world. In the USA, this is an extremely mature and competitive business. Very hard to get into and very hard to make a success of it. Do you think it's developed to the same degree in India?
Private equity is a very sophisticated product, and private equity works in large and sophisticated economies. And until recently, India was neither large nor sophisticated. Right? So if you see the global private equity ecosystem, 95% of it is concentrated in large and sophisticated economies. But mercifully, now India is large. It's a large economy in nominal terms. So we're just about coming to that time where private equity as an asset class is starting to work and perform. Having said that, private equity has been around in India for nearly 25 years. And if it's worked, it's largely the credit goes to the people who've persevered with it. What I'm trying to say is that from an environmental perspective, from an asset class perspective, it is just about starting to work.
Nice. So in terms of, I know it would be a totally kind of unfair comparison, but anything on key metrics like US, India in terms of, typical deal size is much smaller, or there's less leverage in India, or exit lead times are different. Any just thoughts on some of the key differences?
Well, the US is what, there's very little to compare between the US and India. The US economy is nearly 10 times the size of the Indian economy. But the US financial economy is more than 10x the size of the Indian economy because of the use of leverage. And then you bring in the factor of sophistication. So I would say the US private equity ecosystem is about 20x the size of the Indian ecosystem. Right?
Right.
I mean, it's a 20-25 trillion dollar economy versus a 2-3 trillion dollar economy. And the US is 25% of the global economy, but some people reckon it's about 60% of the world's financial economy. So when we look at private equity, it doesn't come as a coincidence that so much of performance, etc., is concentrated in the US.
Got it. So, of course, I had a peek at your website, and one of the things I noticed there was it looks like you engage, and there's a heavy engagement model in the sense that you make the investments and you're engaging with the entrepreneurs, and you try and find the ones, with passion and ambition and, a lot of things there. What's the earliest stage of a company's life that Gaja invests in? Because typically, they're not, early seed stage or startup players. So describe to us the stage at which you try to get in.
Think of a $50 million enterprise value business, let's say typically between 5 and 10 years old, flirting with EBITDA, just maybe 12 to 18 months from EBITDA or EBITDA positive. So we have a framework called scale and transformation. So we're looking for businesses that are ripe for scale and transformation. And
Got
of
it.
course, you have to take these numbers and put them in the context of the size of the Indian economy. So a $50 million business in India, in the US would be a tiny, tiny business, but it's not just as tiny in India as it is in the US.
Got it. So let's move on to the education space. Um, and it's not simply that COVID is driving, the fast evolution of the sector. Something was afoot anyway, right? Like, what was going on, and was it bubbling for a while?
Yes, it's been happening for some time. And of course, education is such a huge sector. So sometimes it's easier to just let's take the K-12 sector and let's talk about what was happening in the K-12 sector for some time. And let's use let's list the trends. We'll talk about things that were already happening and that have been accelerated, and then we'll talk about the things that weren't happening and are happening as a result of COVID. So the use of technology inside the classroom had started to happen. I think all over the world we see that phenomenon. I think digital as a means, as a channel for delivery of education was starting to happen. What we are seeing is an acceleration in the adoption of edtech, massive, massive acceleration. What we are seeing is an acceleration in the propensity of consumers to pay for that. So massive acceleration. Assessment, technology-led assessment was happening, and you'll see an acceleration in that. We'll see an acceleration in remedial. So these are all trends that were, yes, already happening. But I think the one thing that COVID will be remembered for is bridging the gap between the at-home and the school markets in K-12. So COVID will be remembered for bringing in blended learning into the K-12 space. So let me explain that. Schools have traditionally worked with the notion or with the belief that their role ends with the lunch hour, right? So they really haven't focused on how to use the time available for, with the student after the lunch hour. And what COVID has helped them discover is two things. A, you can improve educational outcomes, and B, you can improve financial outcomes by stepping into the at-home space. And why has this happened? Because schools weren't left with a choice, right? Most schools were caught napping. If you look at India, we believe only 5 to 10% of schools in India currently have the technology infrastructure to deliver meaningful learning at home. And I don't think the number will be significantly different in the US. So while many trends have accelerated, and we are just talking about K-12, the use of digital inside and outside classroom, assessment, personalized learning, the one thing which COVID can take specific credit for, apart from acceleration of these trends, is what I said, bridging the gap between the school and the at-home segment.
So while you were describing that, I kind of put up the screen. Can you see the shared screen that I put up there?
Yes, Tariq, you can see your screen.
Okay, it's the one with the 4 bar charts.
Right now, we can see your email screen, so you'll have to switch the mode to the PPT so that.
Oh, thank you for that.
On the PPT earlier.
Okay, so I have to click on this one. Okay. Is that the one with the 4 charts?
We don't see it yet.
You don't see it. Okay. And how about now?
Yes.
Okay, good. Well, thanks. I'm glad I didn't have all my other screens open. That would have been mildly embarrassing. Gopal, you mentioned that higher, for example, taking the second, jump in paid user base. So you're saying more people will be happy to pay, which is understandable. But at the same time, there's going to be a downward pressure on how much they pay. At least that's what I'm hearing in the USA. There are discussions on Why do colleges charge the full amount for online classes and so on and so forth? So these are two opposing factors in terms of overall revenue. Will it be that more people pay a smaller amount so the sector grows, or what do you think that contradiction is going to be?
Absolutely. So what this, so, you know, at home was seen as a micro segment. As it becomes mainstream, what we're realizing is that the addressable market goes up by 3 to 5x. For example, in India right now, price points are at about $225, but at $100, the addressable market is 3 to 5x. And technology will take down the cost, but more importantly, I think schools will take down the cost. Now, so first of all, in K-12, the entry of schools into at-home, I believe, will help reduce cost in the at-home market. Coming to what you just said about colleges, higher education is a unique consumer sector. There is perhaps no other consumer sector which has failed to deliver deflation to consumers. I mean, you know, Tariq, just think about, you know, let's say the first car you bought and how much it cost you. And if you take the same amount in real dollars today, I mean, you can, it, I'm sure the same car is not available, but you can buy a much better car for the same amount of money. But higher education has been in this habit of year-on-year inflation and costs, and it has been insulated from the forces of free markets. Almost every other consumer sector has delivered deflation to consumers, but higher education hasn't. And yes, I mean, it's a big question mark that will COVID finally break this bad habit?
Well, very interesting. I think, I mean, everybody knows of the $1.5 trillion student debt, and absence of cost reduction is one factor. You're saying, you know, they haven't moved with the times, but related to that is the mismatch between what the education system and specifically the higher education system produces and what the market wants in terms of capability and skills and so forth. Now, I know that we have, you know, over the past 2-3 decades, you know, outsourcing. So everything gets outsourced to the cheapest location. Then the last decade, we've seen this huge amount of automation. And that's constantly causing a shift on what skills are needed by the graduates today. And maybe I'm speaking more from a US perspective, but aside from costs not having gone down, I'm sure you're implying that the product itself that is being produced isn't what the market wants. Is there a lot of that as well?
Yes, I think the crux of the issue is that, you know, what is the focus of universities hasn't changed to the extent it should. First of all, the problem is not with the number of jobs. As the economy grows, all said and done, the number of jobs grows. And it's not a problem in the US either. Outsourcing doesn't create a problem with jobs. It just changes the nature of jobs. But universities aren't focused on jobs. Universities aren't focused on skills. You know, the idea of a university hasn't changed for decades, I would say centuries. So universities love to think in terms of life skills and making better citizens. And I think that's a great thing. But this model worked as long as the number of people going to college was small. So there was a time in the US when you went to college meant getting a job. But even though there are so many more jobs today, the problem is that universities aren't focused enough on skills. So universities are doing an okay job on life skills. Universities are doing an okay job on research. These are two things they love, but they don't like the idea of preparing graduates for jobs.
So in the way that you said, K-12 is going to see more blended learning, if you like, mixing up of the home experience with the school experience. Within the higher education, are we going to see more blending of, if you like, life skills with technical skills, getting job skills? Like in Germany, they have a huge emphasis on, you know, apprenticeship, and certain countries have big programs like that. Does that mean that colleges will bring in, to give an example, I think one of my, it's a little player, it's an add-on, a DVD type player, it's more than that. It connects to a smartphone, and it wasn't working. And I tried to open it and I couldn't, and the screws, and how do you unravel this little box? And then I talked to my sons, they're both, done engineering, and, we got stuck and we tried to download the manual. And the point is, do you see that colleges will be forced to introduce courses that cover practical skills and so on? Is that going to be a trend as well?
So colleges have done a great job in terms of, I would say, good to great job in terms of listening to industry, especially in the US, and directing their research programs, more or less, and tuning them in line with the needs of industry. And something similar has to happen with jobs, where universities I see them doing this, will do a better job in terms of directing themselves and aligning themselves to the need of industry. And coming to the cost part, most people, I'm sure, realize this, that as we think of COVID is doing so many things. But do you realize what is one of the biggest changes it's making? It's creating a future generation of digital learners. When all said and done, Tariq, you and I will struggle compared to our kids when it comes to digital learning. But my 8-year-old daughter, who's been forced into digital school thanks to this COVID, 10 years from now, when she goes to college, will be far more comfortable with blended learning than I am currently or I ever will be. So blended learning will become more mainstream as disruptions like these create a new generation of digital learners.
Got it. So let me change the slide to this one here, which is India Education Market Overview. Aparna, is that what you can see?
Yes.
Great. So there's a lot of information here. Gopal, walk us through some of the things that make the Indian segment particularly unique and consequently with a lot of opportunities.
Well, it's unique in the sense that, just look at K-12, 50% of children go to private schools in India. 50% of 270 million children in school go to private schools, right? That's a humongous number and it's growing. So more than 50% of all incremental enrollments in India are happening inside private schools. Again, what's peculiar to India are the price points. So 80% of private schools in India deliver learning at less than $700 a year. Unheard of, right? So the price points. The third is, just the sheer need. I mean, the level of literacy in India is so low. We need 10 million. We have 10 million people joining the workforce every year. So the need for skills. And another peculiarity is the fragmentation. It's super, super fragmented. So the typical Indian private school is a single school establishment, behaves like an SME, and currently spends very little on technology. No wonder the Indian education market is, if not the most exciting, one of the most exciting education markets in the world, simply because of the pervasive nature of the private sector.
Right. So what I'm kind of taking away from that is, the size and the relatively low level of education comparatively, that makes it unique. But just switching to the other end of the spectrum, the very fact that it is large and it's presenting different challenges, isn't that also something that for, the players that are smart, the player that think through, like, everybody's talking about big data, so you need volumes. So what's happening in education? What are the challenges of modernity? You made a big thing about this, our children will be digitally so savvy. So with those things emerging on a large scale in India, I would think that India presents a capability and opportunity of coming up with unique solutions that have not popped up anywhere else in the world, and that will have global application. Do you see that as a possibility?
So yes, I agree, and especially when you also look at the other challenge in India. So let's balance the picture. On one hand, the need for education is massive because there is such a overwhelming failure of the public sector, right? And when people around the world complain about the public sector, but then in India, the failure of the public sector is to a different degree. Let's balance the picture with the challenges. The challenges is the low ability, the ability of consumers to pay, right? Fairly low ability. The third challenge is that is the diversity, right? Is that all said and done, contrary to what most elitist Indians think, uh, not many people in India are comfortable with English, right? So how do you teach people in their mother tongue? So vernacular and the use of vernacular is a challenge. And you can just go on and on. I mean, 67% of Indians are now broadband consumers, but they essentially mode of access is smartphones. And typically there isn't more than one smartphone in a family. So who uses that if you're doing digital education? My wife's involved with one sort of affordable school, and the challenge she's been facing is she's tried to set up this digital learning program, and the challenge she has is, you know, how do is devices. So how do our students get access to devices, and how long can parents share their primary device with the kids? So many challenges, but yes, overall also a huge opportunity. Yes, I won't take it in that direction. I wish the government could play a more constructive role, but let's not go there because we could spend the rest of the evening talking about India's problems with governance.
Got it. So sticking with the challenges, I think you gave some illustration of, in the K to 12 and higher education, any particular opportunities in those sectors or even in the, professional education. I remember one of the comments you made is by the time someone is 60, typically they may have pivoted or upskilled their capabilities 3 times. So there is a lifelong learning phenomenon. So just walk us through some of the opportunities that you as an investor see happening in those spaces.
In a country like India, you have opportunities across the spectrum and in education that's generally true in every part of the world. So look at pre-K itself. I mean, less than 10% of Indian children currently have access to pre-K education. And now let's go to lifelong professional education that you mentioned. I think there we have a more fundamental problem globally. We haven't yet cracked the code to teach grown-ups effectively. We haven't, right? So reskilling is something where we, from a product perspective, haven't properly cracked the code. So we can do checkbox learning, but we can't do real learning for grown-ups whose attention spans and whose ability to learn, we all know our ability to learn deteriorates with age. And the second is you need to bring in connectivity pathways to careers for lifelong education. So we've spoken about lifelong, we've spoken about higher education, blended, we've spoken about K-12, pre-K. I mean, it's not education, but there's a huge opportunity in childcare in India, so across the spectrum.
Right. Got it. So I'm going to share the screen again and go to another page which relates to Gaja Capital investments. So again, Aparna, I'm going to be checking with you. Can you see a slide, Gaja Capital overview?
Yes.
Great. So Gopal, let's move on to your firm's education investments. You have some renown for this now. You've been doing it for many years. So what areas of the education space have you focused on so far, and what has the experience been like? And I'll just put up this slide if it's a useful prompt for you.
Yes, we are a 15-year-old firm. Our first investment was in education, so we've been investing in education for 15 years. We see education as an investing sector 20 years behind healthcare. There's $10 trillion of global spending in healthcare. And there's $6 or $7 trillion of global spending in education. $10 trillion of healthcare spending has created $5 trillion of market cap, and $6 to $7 trillion of education spending has created only $250 billion of market cap. So there's a big catch up to do. We'd like to invest so much more than what we've invested, but so far we've pretty much invested across the spectrum. If you look at some of our recent investments, educational initiatives is leading player in India for technology-based school assessments and machine learning-based remedial. And if you go to the right-hand side, again, that's one of our recent investments, Sports Village. Sports Village delivers sports and fitness programs to schools, runs academies for students. Just as kids started to take maths and science coaching classes in India 20, 30 years ago, now sports is finding its way into curriculum, into the curriculum of schools. And one of the trends that COVID is accelerating is the spend on non-academic programs. So just some examples.
All right. So you just said something about a lot of catching up to do. From a pure investor perspective, the multiple is a lot less. The delay of getting a return on the investment is much more. It takes longer. So is this another example of Gopal breaking the trend and going into a sector like you started doing on choice of college? I mean, you kind of breaking ground here, I would think, right?
Well, thanks for saying that, Tariq. But no, I mean, I think it was a lonely vigil 15 years ago when we started investing in education. Today, I would say there are many more investors who've woken up to the excitement of A, education in general across the world, and B, to education in India. But I think just take a step back. I think globally, society hasn't yet made up its mind about the role of the private sector in education. And it has to a much greater extent in healthcare, but it hasn't in education. And who are the biggest sufferers from this? Children. So yes, there's been a lot of catch up. There's a lot more catch up to happen. And I see this catch up happening also in tandem with how society makes up its mind around the role of the private sector.
Right. So just staying with the investment perspective and coming back to the engagement, you find the companies of that threshold size, 50 million and so forth, and you engage heavily with the people. So can you give some idea of time, how much time you end up investing, or the areas of support, or indeed how that changes across the stage of a company or stage of the investment?
Well, investors love to make profitable investments without doing much work. Okay? But, that's not true. There's no free lunch, right? And I would say even until 10 years ago, investing private equity was largely about capital. But today, it isn't. Because markets have become more competitive, consumer markets have become more competitive, investors have become more demanding. So businesses have to do a lot more in less time. So our proposition is not just about capital, it's also about operating skills. That's where sector specialization starts to play a role. So, we've also started buying control of businesses. In order to do control, you need a CEO mindset. So as a firm, we have the CEO mindset. We can run businesses ourselves. We have a sense of where markets are going, where consumers are going, what needs to be done with products. So one is that. The second is, of course, how small businesses can't hire very capable people to create their systems. So we've hired some really capable, experienced people who can work for smaller businesses. And, so inside they can be as well run as larger businesses. Yeah, this is how some of the areas we work with.
Right. Okay, so I will kind of touch upon one final thing, and then hopefully we will be getting questions from the attendees. And Aparna, I cannot see the chat window, so hopefully you can prompt me
We
in the
have a
right
few
spot.
questions in the chat, and a couple of questions.
Okay, so let me just wrap up one thing, and then we can go there. So when you're looking, I think you said what you're looking for, the size and the type, so I'm not going to repeat that, but any guidance or tips you'd like to give aspiring entrepreneurs, particularly in this space and in the dynamic that's going on that we've touched upon?
Well, I'm as much I'm probably more an entrepreneur than I'm an investor. So I'm an entrepreneur investor, and I'd rather speak as an entrepreneur to say that I think sometimes budding entrepreneurs, in order for ventures to become careful, they must address both. You need one and one to become 11, which is consumers and investors. But if you were to choose one, you have to choose consumers over investors. Value is built when consumers buy in. So it's very important for young entrepreneurs not to lose sight of the fact that for every $1 that can come from an investor, 10 to $100 can come from a consumer. And if you leverage this well, then it's a win-win for everyone, for the business, for your quotient in the business, so on and so forth.
I see. So I guess what you're saying is less focus on getting the cash flow slides and the financial terms perfect. Focus on the business model.
Yeah. Focus on consumers. Focus on finding consumers who can pay.
Right. Good. Great. So, gosh, I am really negated on this
Should we
bottom.
start
Oh, okay,
with the
got it.
question? Okay.
Okay, I found it. Thanks, Aparna. So let's see, these bar charts, very interesting. Are they specific to any market like US, India? They're India specific is what I thought, right? Gopal, those bar charts?
Those bar charts are for India.
Right. How long will it create the digital infrastructure for? How long will it take to create the digital for government schools? Yeah, just thoughts on, the
Yeah.
rollout of this fancy digital infrastructure.
Well, that's a painful question. Yes, the truth is that learning has been literally absent in India in the government school sector over the last 4 months, except for exceptions here and there. And I can't answer that question. I can only say that in the private school sector, which is 50% of students, schools are responding. Schools are responding. And currently, like I said, pre-COVID, only 5 to 10% of schools were prepared, but that number is rapidly changing, and that's the opportunity for entrepreneurs and companies, to offer tech solutions to schools so that they can deliver blended learning to K-12 students. But in the government sector, I won't hazard a guess. It should happen sooner than when it will happen. Actually.
I mean, is there some element of leapfrogging? Like, people said wired telephones are dead, everybody's wireless, so you move forward so many years in a short time. None of those ideas come into play here?
Well, India is certainly leapfrogging, like unlike the US where PCs led the whole penetration of computing into homes. In India, it's mobile phones, right? That are leading the penetration of computing into homes. But it takes two to tango. It takes a motivated teacher at one end and it takes a student at the other end. And the problem in government schools is motivated teachers. So yes, there is leapfrogging happening. And but I can't say when the tech infrastructure in government schools will be built. It's
Right.
probably been paid over at least once already, but it's not there functioning.
Okay, just going through the comments, a bunch of people could not see the slides and so on. Yes, we will send out the slides at the end. So there are several very content-rich ones. We'll get those out. Comment here, Gopal, would you comment on the future of music education in the space within EdTech and online e-learning? Music education.
Oh, as someone said, from war follows commerce, and from commerce follows the arts, right? This is the progression of society. So I think India is making that progression where more and more parents are starting to think beyond academic outcomes, non-academic outcomes. One of my regrets in life is I can't play a musical instrument, but both our girls are learning to play the piano. I love it. And I'm an example. I'm an example of other Indian parents. So yes, there's going to be more and more music education in India. It's happened in other countries. This transition, war, commerce, arts, it's a pattern that you see through human civilization, and you will see more and more music education in India. And there are already companies that are partnering with schools to deliver music education.
Right. And I guess music, like many other things, it's a very participative thing. Like, if you're playing the piano, one thing is somebody on the phone listening to you playing the piano. Another thing is an audience, right? So with COVID and the changes, I guess the models are going to have to evolve where the absence of physical contact is no longer the big handicap that it would be at the moment.
Tariq, I'm amazed how soon people have adapted. So both my girls continue to learn piano over digital. In fact, they have a brilliant teacher, but she was not very literate digitally. I hope she's not around, so I can say this. She's learned, and the classes and the lessons are delivered over digital. So there is a computer and a phone setup, so two camera setup, and it works.
Right. Just moving on, question. You mentioned increased spending in non-academic programs. How big do you see the role of technology education, such as robotics, AI, coding for kids?
It goes back to what I'm saying that in schools now schools have discovered that there's another 2 or 3 hours after lunch at home that they can leverage, right? And I think this is what will drive or accelerate programs like robotics, AI, music, sports, right? To say that, listen, I mean, so much of this is happening in a hobby sort of a way right now. But schools have an opportunity to take control of this and build this into their overall value proposition.
That's interesting you mentioned that. I have not noticed that dynamic in the USA. And in fact, I do spend time at an elementary school, as a tutor, helping reading and stuff. And it's during the day, but once the kids are home, they're no longer, the school's purview anymore. And what
And
you're
that's
saying is that's
exactly
going to change?
that is going to change. And I'd love, here's one place where well, let's see, I could be wrong, but I strongly believe that you'll see schools in the after school space. It's already happening. I'm seeing it. What I'm only talking about is the scale of this.
So teachers will need to be pulled into that process?
Oh, yes, it's a win-win proposition. It's a win-win-win, right? I mean, parents, students need remedial. See, what is it that's not working very well in schools? Many things, but assessments, for example. Schools are reluctant to assess. They're reluctant to discover the gaps in learning. Why? Because they are unable to provide remedial. They're unable to provide remedial because there is no space and time. And at home expands space and time. So you have this huge at-home market, the huge tutoring market that has mushroomed, essentially feeding on the gaps in the schools. Schools should be doing remedial. So if you have 3 sections in, let's say, grade 3, the best teacher for maths across these 3 sections should be doing an after-school remedial. And that's now possible.
Yeah, I mean, the opposite is I'm a teacher. I'm done at 2 o'clock. I'm checked out. So don't pull me in. I mean, that's right. But just extending that, like just yesterday, I think I was reading in Bloomberg or the New York Times that the question of $60,000 per year, still charging 60,000 for online classes, so there's this pressure. And they're looking at what can be done to make the online model more efficient. So one of the things is instead of just simply streaming the class, have smaller classes, small tutorials. And have the professor grant access to the professor to the students in groups of 10 or 15 Zoom calls. So, people are thinking about different models to engage. But again, the pressure is going to be on professors who are saying, wait a minute, I've done my 4 hours a week. Why should I do 4 hours a day? So I think that's going to play out. But maybe that relates to what you were saying. The education sector has managed to resist the forces of change, and they will no longer be able to do so.
Yeah, I wonder how long these luxuries can be afforded.
Right. Going back to the questions, is the online distance education here to stay, or the moment situation improves, everyone will go back to traditional offline?
You can't put this genie back in the bottle. It's both. That's why I keep on saying that it's going to become blended. Schools have educational institutions, more and more educational institutions have discovered, students have discovered, many more people have gotten over their inhibitions. So that it's not one or the other, it's both. It's here to stay and it's going to grow and it's going to create win, win, and win.
Do you think do you think ed tech is more efficient for younger students grades K to 5 or older students grade 9 to 12?
Younger kids learn differently and there's a challenge, right? So, I mean, uh, well, across age groups, it works differently. I think um, we've done a better job with older students as far as digital is concerned, but disruptions like these will help us get over K to 5.
Is there any cell phone, in inverted commas, is there any cell phone of education technology that you can think about?
I'm trying to guess what that question means in the sense that, is there a device that is an education device or a phone that has functionality suited? Hey, listen, I mean, uh, iPads, so laptops, tablets, PCs, they're going to change after COVID. I mean, haven't you discovered how ill-equipped your typical laptop is for a Zoom call, right? I mean, so, our expectation from our devices will change. And yes, mobile phones will have to, moving in a certain direction. Designers will think more and more of them as devices of learning. So probably every cell phone will become an education cell phone.
Yep. So just reading this some more here, really appreciate the positivity when you said COVID will be remembered for. Nice to see past tense used, present situation. Question is, you mentioned you would love to invest much more. What exactly do you see missing majorly when you would love to invest?
Yeah. Well, societies in general around the world and especially in India, I think have made it very difficult for the private sector to serve consumers. So, it's like I won't do it and I won't get out of the way. That's the role, that's the typical attitude of the public sector around the world. I would say broadly that's the problem. So in almost every other human problem, we are comfortable with accepting that the private sector is going to solve that problem. And of course, sometimes the public sector is needed where the markets don't work. I don't think there's a private company yet that would want to, but actually I'm wrong about that as well. So look at space travel. It used to be said that market doesn't apply there. But as soon as we have a market model, we have that particular activity going into the private sector. The point I'm trying to make is the biggest challenge, at least in India, is so as to say the adversarial role of the state when it comes to the private sector.
Okay, timing wise, we've just got a few more minutes. Okay, what do you look for in companies? I think you covered that, the scale and the passion and the opportunity and so forth. How do you see your investment in EduComp?
Well, it had a great run from 2005 to 2010, and then it just couldn't handle scale. I think there was so EduComp has now become part of the lexicon, right? Smart class has become a generic word, and EduComp could have been so much more. But in technology, companies do come and go. The level of the mortality rate is high. So it's not the first tech company that has fallen behind time. But yes, there was a time between 2005 and 2010 when it pioneered the use of technology in classrooms. And today, at least in India, and I think in many parts of the world, it's difficult to imagine a classroom without technology in it. So at least that credit has to go to Educom.
Got it. Just running through a couple more. In EdTech investments, looking at indicators, for example, how hard is it to have quality indicators built in?
Sorry, I didn't understand.
Performance quality indicators such, for example, quality of education being delivered?
Well, education inherently is so aligned to measurement. There are very few activities that can literally run real time with measurement. But we don't invest enough in measurement. So there is some measurement is absolutely important. Education is very outcome oriented. And because it's so outcome oriented, there needs to be measurement, but they can be even better and more granular measurement with technology. And you're going to see how technology will bring down the cost and improve the quality of measurement.
Got it. So just one final one, and I notice people are starting to move on because time goes on. What's the smallest ticket size Gaja Capital has made in terms of investments?
Well, that changes with time. I think now, we're looking at, it's tough for us to look at, so we think 25 to 40 million US, but we also buy smaller businesses from inside our businesses. So, we would buy smaller businesses, but from our portfolio companies, directly from the funds we invest in, the ticket size is more like 25 to 40.
Got it. Well, I'm going to wrap up here with questions. And before we hand back to Aparna, any additional thoughts or, just little gems that, we could have covered and I was asleep and I did not pick them up? I mean, just any final thoughts?
Well, we've covered a lot. I'm excited about, I'm excited about the role that the private sector can play and is playing and is increasingly playing in education. The role that private capital can play to help private sector play that role. And, I think it's a great place for entrepreneurs to be in. And especially India, I mean, it's difficult to think of a country more complex, more diverse than India. There's so many challenges, but there are so many opportunities. So India needs the best brains in the world to come together. If you have a problem, it exists in India. And if you have a solution, there's probably a place for it in India.
Great. I think it's fantastic. We've kind of made this strong connection. In our, we have an education special interest group, which is what this is, about 80, 90 members. And I'm sure everybody will benefit from the thoughts, but also we're hoping to get a lot of, connections made and a lot of sharing of ideas and so forth. So this has been truly very helpful, Gopal. Excellent. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much. It's been a privilege.
Aparna, I will send you the slides if you don't mind sharing them with the group.
I don't.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Gopal. Thank you, Tariq. And we would be sharing the PowerPoint as well as the recording of the session with all of our registered attendees. Thank you so much for joining everyone.
I have a request, Aparna. If you could send me a copy of the notes, because some of our participants have made requests to me. So if you can just send me a copy of our notes, I'll ensure that I can respond to some of their requests.
Sure, I'll do that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.